The transport ship's doors hissed open, and Ambassador Jack Morrison walked out like he was stepping into a neighborhood bar instead of the most powerful space station in the Varnith Empire. He had a half-finished coffee in his right hand and his formal jacket thrown over his shoulder. His tie was loose, his shirt sleeves were rolled up, and he looked completely relaxed. The massive docking bay went dead silent. Hundreds of guards in gleaming armor stood at perfect attention, their weapons held at exact angles. Every single one of them stared at this human, who looked like he'd just woken up from a nap. Their faceplates, which normally glowed a steady blue, started flickering orange with shock and anger. Commander Blake Warren stood at the front of the formation. He was a veteran of 30 years, covered in scars from a dozen wars, and he'd seen almost everything the galaxy could throw at him. But even he felt his jaw tighten as he watched this Earth diplomat stroll down the ramp like he owned the place. Jack took a sip of his coffee, looked around at the crystal walls and floating platforms, and let out a low whistle. Then he walked straight toward Empress Talira. The Empress stood on a raised platform, surrounded by her personal guards. She was tall, with skin that seemed to shimmer like starlight and eyes that looked like they were carved from diamonds. She wore robes that cost more than a small ship, and she ruled over 200 planets. People bowed when they saw her. Some people trembled. Jack Morrison stuck out his hand. Every guard in the bay tensed. Hands moved toward weapons. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Behind Warren, his second-in-command, Lieutenant Foster, made a strangled sound. Nobody touched the Empress. It was the first rule, the most important rule. You bowed, you kept your distance, and you spoke only when spoken to. Jack just stood there with his hand out and a friendly smile on his face. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice echoing in the silent bay. "Hell of a view you've got here." The approach through those rings was something else. Warren's hand went to his sidearm. This was it. This human was about to cause an interstellar incident in his first 30 seconds. The other guards were looking at him, waiting for orders. One word, and they grabbed this idiot and throw him back on his ship. But then Empress Talira did something that shocked everyone in the room. She smiled, actually smiled, and then she reached out and shook Jack's hand. "Welcome, Ambassador Morrison," she said, her voice warm and musical. "I trust your journey was comfortable. The hyperspace lanes from Earth can be quite turbulent this time of cycle." Jack grinned wider. "Beats sitting in DC traffic, that's for sure. You know how it is. Bumper to bumper for hours. Everybody honking, nobody moving. At least in hyperspace, you're getting somewhere." The Empress actually laughed. The sound was like bells, and it made the guards shift uncomfortably. Warren had served Talira for 15 years. He'd seen her smile at diplomatic functions, seen her nod politely at jokes. He'd never heard her laugh like that. Behind Jack, a woman with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail came bouncing down the ramp. She had a tablet under one arm and was looking around with obvious excitement. This was Katie Rodriguez, Jack's aide. She was supposed to be reviewing protocols and preparing for the formal welcome ceremony. Instead, she walked right up to protocol officer, a stick-thin Varnith named Coordinator Vess, and started talking like they were old friends. "Hey, so I've got to ask," Katie said, smiling broadly, "where's a girl get some decent food around here? I've been living on protein bars for 2 weeks, and I'm dying for something with actual flavor. You guys have anything like pizza? Please tell me someone in this galaxy invented pizza." Coordinator Vess's faceplate went from blue to orange to a confused purple. He looked at her like she'd just spoken in a completely unknown language, which, in a way, she had. Lieutenant Foster leaned close to Commander Warren. His voice was barely a whisper, but Warren could hear the panic in it. "Sir, this is a disaster. They're violating every protocol in the book." The ambassador touched the Empress. "His aide is talking about food. They're treating this like a vacation. We need to do something." Warren didn't respond. He was too busy watching Jack Morrison. On the surface, the ambassador looked completely casual. He was still chatting with the Empress about the station's architecture, pointing at the ceiling with his coffee cup and asking questions about the energy shielding. He looked like a tourist on a sightseeing trip. But Warren had been reading people for 3 decades. He'd survived assassination attempts and ambushes because he knew how to watch, really watch, what people were doing. And what he saw when he looked at Jack Morrison's eyes told a very different story than his relaxed posture. Those eyes were moving constantly. They flicked to each guard position, noting weapons and angles. They tracked the exits, all 7 of them, cataloging which were closest and which had cover. They paused for a fraction of a second on the Empress's personal guards, assessing their stance and readiness. They even glanced up at the ceiling supports, probably calculating if they could hold weight. Jack Morrison was mapping the entire room, like a soldier preparing for battle. He was doing it while smiling and drinking coffee and making small talk, but he was doing it. Every joke, every casual gesture, was cover for a mind that was working like a tactical computer. Warren had seen plenty of diplomats. Most of them were either naive fools who thought nice words could stop wars, or sneaky politicians who had knives behind smiles. Jack Morrison was neither. He was something else entirely. Something dangerous pretending to be harmless. The formal welcome ceremony was supposed to last an hour. There were supposed to be speeches, introductions, a reading of the Alliance Treaty. Instead, Jack wrapped it up in 10 minutes, claiming he didn't want to waste anyone's time with boring formalities when there was real work to do. The guards didn't know what to do with that. Neither did Coordinator Vess, who stood holding his prepared speech like it was a broken weapon. As Jack and Katie were escorted toward the diplomatic quarters, Warren heard the human ambassador say something to his aide that made him pause. "Nice place," Jack said quietly. "Good sight lines, solid construction. Secure but not paranoid. Could be worse." Katie nodded, tapping something on her tablet. "I counted 43 guards in that bay. 19 had clear firing positions. Energy weapons, mostly pulse rifles. Old model, but well-maintained. They weren't tourists. They were professionals. And they just assessed the Empire's most secure station in the time it took to shake hands and crack a few jokes." Warren watched them disappear down the corridor, still chatting like they were heading to lunch instead of their quarters. Around him, the guards were muttering, their faceplates still orange with shock and disapproval. This was going to be interesting. 3 weeks had passed since Jack Morrison arrived at the station, and the Royal Guard was ready to mutiny. Captain Morris sat in his office staring at a stack of formal complaint documents that reached halfway up his desk. 47 complaints. In 3 weeks. That had to be some kind of record. Every morning at exactly 6 in the morning, Jack went jogging. That wouldn't normally be a problem, except he jogged to the Hall of Ancestors. The Hall of Ancestors. The most sacred place on the entire station. It was where the Empire kept the memory crystals of every ruler going back 1,000 years. Guards were supposed to whisper when they walked through there. Some didn't even breathe, loudly out of respect. Jack Morrison ran through it in shorts and a tank top, listening to what he called rock music through earbuds, his footsteps echoing off the ancient walls. He'd wave at the guards on duty as he passed, sometimes calling out a cheerful good morning that bounced around the crystal chambers like a slap in the face. The first time it happened, 3 guards tried to stop him. Jack had just smiled, pulled out one earbud, and said the Empress had given him permission to use any part of the station for exercise. When they checked, it turned out to be true. Lyra had actually approved it. So now, every morning, they had to stand there and watch this human treat their most holy sight like a running track. Then there was his quarters. The diplomatic suite had been prepared according to centuries of tradition. Meditation crystals arranged in sacred patterns. Energy flow aligned with cosmic harmonics. Furniture positioned for maximum spiritual balance. It had taken a team of experts 3 days to set it up properly. Jack had gutted the whole thing in an afternoon. The meditation crystals were now sitting in a storage closet, in their place. He'd installed something he called a pull-up bar, which was basically a metal rod mounted in the doorway that he used to hang from and lift himself up and down. The furniture was rearranged into what he called a functional layout, which meant everything was shoved against the walls to create open floor space. And the cooking. Oh, the cooking. The diplomatic wing had a commercial-grade air filtration system designed to handle anything. It was not designed to handle whatever Jack Morrison was doing in there. The smell of sizzling meat and spices filled the corridors every evening. He made something called burgers, which were apparently ground meat pressed into flat circles and cooked until they smoked. And something else called chili, which involved beans and peppers and created a smell so strong it made some guards' eyes water. The kitchen staff had offered to prepare anything he wanted. Anything at all. Earth food, alien delicacies, whatever he needed. Jack had thanked them politely and kept cooking his own meals anyway. When asked why, he just said he enjoyed it. Enjoyed it. Like standing over a hot stove was somehow fun. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, was what he was doing to the guards themselves. He was making friends with them. Actually talking to them like they were regular people instead of elite warriors of the Empire. Guard Tyler, a junior member who'd only been on the Royal Guard for 6 months, had been caught playing something called poker with the ambassador. Poker involved cards and betting actual money, and Tyler had apparently lost 30 credits before Captain Morris found out and put a stop to it. Tyler had been mortified, certain he'd be kicked off the guard. Instead, Jack had just laughed and said they'd play again sometime, double or nothing. Guard Kelly was even worse. She'd been assigned to corridor duty outside Jack's quarters, which meant standing perfectly still for 8-hour shifts. Boring work, but it was an honor to guard the diplomatic wing. After the first week, Jack had started bringing her coffee during her shift. Then he'd started telling her jokes. Earth jokes about humans and their weird culture and strange sayings. Kelly had tried to maintain professional distance, but some of the jokes were actually funny. Now she knew 17 of them and had accidentally laughed out loud twice while on duty. The emergency meeting was tense. 8 senior guards sat around the table in the security office, and most of them looked ready to do something drastic. Captain Morris was pacing back and forth, his faceplate flickering between orange stress and red anger. "He's destroying everything," Morris said, his voice tight. 3 weeks. 3 weeks, and he's turned the station into a circus. He taught Tyler how to gamble. Kelly's making jokes on duty. Yesterday, I caught him showing Guard Brooks how to make something called a grilled cheese sandwich in the break room. A grilled cheese sandwich. He asked Guard Stevens about his family. Another guard added, sounding horrified, personal questions about Stevens' children, what they're studying in school, what they want to be when they grow up. That's not even the worst of it, Morris continued. He reorganized the meditation room schedule to make time for what he calls a gym session. He's invited guards to join him, to exercise, together, like we're some kind of casual fitness club, instead of the Royal Guard. Everyone started talking at once, voices rising, complaints piling on top of each other. Only Commander Blake Warren sat quietly at the head of the table, saying nothing. His face was unreadable, his posture relaxed. He'd been watching Jack Morrison very carefully for 3 weeks, and he'd noticed things the others hadn't. That evening was the Lunar Festival banquet. It was one of the biggest events of the year, celebrating the founding of the Empire. The Great Hall was filled with nobles, diplomats, military commanders, and important visitors from across the galaxy. Everything was formal, traditional, perfect. The seating arrangements had caused a huge argument. Jack had requested changes to where people sat, claiming he wanted to mix different groups together so people could have interesting conversations. The protocol office had nearly had a collective breakdown. Seating was arranged by rank and importance. You didn't just change it because you wanted interesting conversations. But again, somehow, the Empress had approved it. So the carefully planned seating chart was thrown out and replaced with Jack's version, which seemed completely random. Nobles sat next to military officers. Scientists were placed with merchants. It was chaos. Jack himself was seated 3 spots away from the Empress, close enough to talk, but not in a position of highest honor. He spent the first part of the meal chatting with everyone around him, asking questions, making jokes, being his usual casual self. Then came the main course. Servers brought out the traditional festival dish, a delicacy prepared only once a year, using ingredients from the Empress's private gardens. It was placed before each guest with ceremonial care. Jack suddenly stood up. The entire hall went quiet. You didn't stand during the festival meal. It was incredibly rude. Guards tense, hands moving toward weapons. Jack reached across the table, picked up his plate, and switched it with the Empress's. The whole thing took maybe 3 seconds. He looked directly at Talira and said quietly, "Trust me on this one." Then he sat back down like nothing had happened. The hall erupted in shocked whispers. Captain Morris looked ready to vault over the table and dragged Jack out of the room. The Empress just stared at her new plate, then at Jack, her expression unreadable. 5 seconds later, every poison detector in the room started screaming. Alarms blared. Red lights flashed. Security barriers slammed down over the exits. Guards drew weapons and surrounded the Empress in a protective formation. The plate Jack had taken, the one that had been meant for Talira, was broadcasting toxin warnings so loud they hurt to hear. Analysis later would show it contained a poison so deadly that a single bite would have killed her in under 3 minutes. A horrible, painful death that no medical technology could stop. Commander Warren stood slowly, his eyes locked on Jack Morrison. The ambassador sat calmly in his chair, not even looking worried. While chaos exploded around him, Warren thought back to the seating chart. The random, chaotic seating chart that Jack had insisted on. The one that had placed him exactly 3 spots away from the Empress. Close enough to reach her quickly. Close enough to switch plates before anyone could stop him. The perfect position to intercept an assassination attempt. Nothing this human did was random. Nothing was casual. It was all calculated, all planned, hidden behind a smile and a joke and a relaxed attitude. Warren's eyes narrowed as he watched guards rush to secure the room. Jack Morrison wasn't just a diplomat. He was something far more dangerous. And he'd just saved the Empress's life, while everyone else was still trying to figure out what was happening. The emergency security meeting happened 2 days after the assassination attempt. Every senior member of the Royal Guard was crammed into the conference room, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. After Jack had saved the Empress's life, some guards thought he was a hero. Others thought he was a dangerous wild card who'd gotten lucky. Captain Morris was firmly in the second camp. "This can't continue," Morris said, slamming his hand on the table. "Yes, he stopped the poisoning. I'll give him that. But he's still a disaster waiting to happen. The man has no discipline, no respect for protocol, no sense of military structure. He's going to get someone killed, and when that happens, it'll be on us for not stopping it sooner." Several guards nodded in agreement. One of them spoke up, a veteran named Sergeant Cole. "He's teaching our junior members bad habits. They're starting to act casual on duty. I caught 2 of them laughing yesterday. Laughing while on patrol. And he still jogs to the Hall of Ancestors every morning," another added. "Assassination attempt or not, that's disrespectful to our entire culture." The complaints kept coming. Jack was too friendly, too casual, too unpredictable. He didn't follow orders properly. He questioned things that shouldn't be questioned. He treated serious situations like jokes. The list went on and on. Commander Blake Warren sat at the head of the table, listening to everything but saying nothing. He'd been quiet through the whole meeting, just watching and listening. Finally, when there was a pause in the complaints, he spoke. His jogging route, Warren said quietly. The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at him. "Has anyone actually mapped where he runs?" Confused looks. Captain Morris frowned. "Through the Hall of Ancestors, sir. Every morning. Same route." "Not the same route," Warren corrected. He pulled up a holographic display of the station. "He varies it slightly every day. And if you track all his different paths over the past 3 weeks, you'll notice something interesting." He highlighted sections of the map in red. He's covered every single vulnerable access point in the residential sector. Every maintenance shaft, every service corridor, every emergency exit. Places where our patrol patterns have gaps. Places where someone could sneak in undetected. The guard stared at the map. Warren continued. "His casual conversations," he said. "The ones where he asks personal questions and makes friends with junior guards. In the past 3 weeks, information he's gathered has helped us identify 3 intelligence leaks we completely missed. 3. One was a maintenance worker selling shift schedules. Another was a communications officer passing messages to outside contacts. The third was a supply contractor who was mapping our defensive positions." Morris opened his mouth, then closed it again. "And the cooking," Warren went on. "He insists on preparing his own food, makes it himself, uses ingredients he personally selects, which means his food supply is completely independent of the central kitchen system. The same system that was just used to try to poison the Empress. You can't poison food someone prepares themselves from ingredients you don't control. The room was completely silent now. Warren looked around at each guard, making eye contact. "Everything he does has purpose," he said firmly. "The chaos, the jokes, the casual attitude, the protocol violations. It's all cover. He's doing security work that we should have been doing, and he's doing it so smoothly that we thought he was just being disrespectful. He's not undisciplined. He's using a different kind of discipline than we're used to." Before anyone could respond, alarms started blaring throughout the station. Red emergency lights flashed. A voice came over the intercom announcing that Research Station 7, an outpost 3 hours away, was under attack by pirates. They needed immediate military assistance. The guards jumped into action, preparing a rescue team. It was a standard military operation. Send in the elite fighters, secure the station, evacuate civilians, eliminate the threat. No diplomats, no civilians, definitely no ambassadors who'd only been on the station for 3 weeks. Then Jack Morrison walked into the briefing room in combat gear. "I'm going with you," he said simply. Captain Morris looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "Absolutely not. This is a military operation. You're a diplomat." "I'm also the only person here who's fought pirates in zero-gravity environments," Jack replied, "which is exactly what Research Station 7 is. Your guards train in normal gravity. Pirates love zero-G. You're going to need someone who knows how they fight. It was against every protocol. Diplomats didn't go on combat missions. It was dangerous, foolish, and completely inappropriate." Morris started to say no, started to order Jack to stay behind, but then Commander Warren spoke up. He goes, Warren said. Everyone stared at him. Morris looked like he'd been slapped. "Sir, with respect, that's insane. He's not trained for this. He's not part of our unit. He could get hurt or killed, and then we'd have an interstellar incident on our hands." Warren looked at Jack, studying him carefully. Then he nodded. He goes, "That's an order." The trip to Research Station 7 took 2 hours at maximum speed. The guards spent the time checking weapons, reviewing station layouts, and preparing for combat. Jack sat quietly in the corner, checking his own gear with practiced efficiency. Some of the guards watched him nervously. Others ignored him completely. When they arrived, the situation was worse than expected. The pirates had breached the station's main hull. Life support was failing. Fires burned in 3 sections. Civilians were trapped throughout the complex. And the pirates themselves were heavily armed and fighting with the desperation of people who had nothing to lose. The rescue team split into groups. Jack ended up with Lieutenant Foster's squad, along with Guard Davis and Guard Henderson. Foster made it clear he didn't want Jack there, but orders were orders. Then combat started and everything changed. The guards had trained for this. They were professionals. But something about fighting in zero gravity threw them off. The pirates moved like they'd been born in space, bouncing off walls, using momentum in ways that didn't make sense to people used to gravity. Jack moved through the chaos like he'd done it 1,000 times before. He didn't look casual anymore. Didn't look friendly or relaxed. He was cold, focused, efficient. Every movement had purpose. Every action was calculated. He wasn't the joking diplomat who made burgers and told stories. He was something else entirely. Guard Davis got caught when a corridor collapsed, debris blocking his escape route and fire spreading toward him. Jack was there in seconds, pulling him free, half carrying him to safety while plasma bolts burned past their heads. Guard Henderson panicked when she found herself face to face with a plasma charge of pirates had set to blow a hole in the station's core. She froze, staring at the timer counting down, her hands shaking. Jack appeared beside her, his voice calm and steady, talking her through the disarmament procedure step by step. His hands guided hers when she couldn't make the move. The charge deactivated with 11 seconds left on the timer. And when a pirate got a clear shot at Lieutenant Foster from behind, Jack moved without thinking. He threw himself between them, taking a plasma bolt to the shoulder that was meant for Foster's head. The shot burned through his armor, scorching flesh, and Jack went down hard. But Foster was alive. By the time the station was secure and civilians evacuated, Jack was barely conscious. The plasma burn on his shoulder was still smoking, the smell of burnt flesh mixing with the station's recycled air. They got him to the medical bay on their ship, and the medics went to work immediately. Lieutenant Foster stood nearby, watching them treat the wound. The plasma had burned deep, 3rd degree at least, maybe worse. It had to hurt like nothing Foster could imagine. But Jack was awake and he was talking. "That went pretty well," Jack said, his voice a bit rough but steady. "Everyone made it out. That's better than most rescue ops." The medic was injecting painkillers, but they hadn't kicked in yet. They wouldn't kick in for at least another minute. Jack was still feeling everything, still talking like he was discussing the weather instead of laying there with a hole burned in his shoulder. Katie Rodriguez burst into medical bay, her face pale with worry. "Jack, oh my God, are you okay? They said you got shot, I thought." "I'm fine," Jack interrupted, managing a weak grin. "Barely a scratch. You should see the other guys." "You got shot with a plasma weapon," Katie said flatly. "That's not a scratch." "Okay, maybe a medium-sized scratch," Jack conceded. Then he looked at Lieutenant Foster. "Hey, you all right? That pirate got pretty close." Foster stared at him. The human had taken a shot meant for him, a shot that would have killed him instantly. And now he was laying there with a smoking wound, making jokes and asking if Foster was okay. "How are you laughing right now?" Foster asked quietly. "You're in pain. You could have died. How are you just joking about it?" Jack looked at him for a moment, and for just a second, the casual mask dropped. Foster saw something real underneath, something honest. "Because we all made it out," Jack said simply. "Davis is alive. Henderson disarmed that charge. You're standing here talking to me. Everyone we went to save got evacuated safely. Yeah, I got hurt, but everyone lived. That's worth celebrating. That's worth smiling about." The painkiller started to kick in, and Jack's eyes got a bit unfocused. But he was still smiling, still acting like getting shot was just part of a normal day. Lieutenant Foster looked down at this human who'd saved his life, who'd saved Davis and Henderson, who'd helped rescue dozens of civilians while making it look easy. 3 weeks ago, he'd thought Jack Morrison was a dangerous fool. Now, he wasn't sure what to think, except that maybe Commander Warren had been right all along. Maybe everything Jack really did have purpose. And maybe that purpose was keeping people alive, no matter what it cost him. Commander Blake Warren found Jack Morrison in the medical bay 3 hours after they'd returned from Research Station 7. The doctors had patched up his shoulder, wrapped it in regenerative bandages, and told him to rest for at least 2 days. Instead, Jack was sitting up in bed with a tablet balanced on his lap, typing with one hand while his injured shoulder rested in a sling. Warren stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching. Jack's face was tight with pain despite the medication, and he had to stop every few seconds to catch his breath. But he kept typing, his good hand moving steadily across the screen. "You don't have to do that now," Warren said, stepping into the room. Jack looked up, a bit surprised. "Commander, didn't hear you come in." He glanced back at the tablet. "Just finishing the incident report. Want to get done while everything's still fresh in my mind. It can wait until you recovered." "Yeah, probably," Jack agreed, but he didn't stop typing. "But I found that if you wait too long, you start forgetting details. Little things that might seem unimportant but could matter later. Better to write it all down now, even if my spelling's a bit off." Warren pulled up a chair and sat down beside the bed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was quiet in the medical bay, just the soft of equipment and the occasional beep from a monitor. Finally, Jack saved his work and set the tablet aside. "You wanted something, Commander?" he asked. Warren had been thinking about this conversation for days, really since the moment Jack had arrived at the station. Now seemed like the right time to have it. Jack was stuck in bed, couldn't run away or deflect with jokes and casual conversation. And after what happened at Research Station 7, Warren thought he'd earned an honest discussion. "Why the act?" Warren asked directly. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Act? You know what I mean. The casual attitude, the protocol violations, the jokes, and the cooking and the jogging through sacred halls. You're clearly capable of following protocol when you need to. You proved that during the rescue operation. You moved like a trained soldier, followed orders perfectly, worked as part of a unit without any problems. So why spend 3 weeks pretending to be something you're not?" Jack was quiet for a long moment, studying Warren's face. Then he smiled, but it was different from his usual grin. This one was tired, honest, maybe a bit sad. "You really want to know?" he asked. I wouldn't be asking if I didn't. Jack shifted in the bed, trying to get comfortable despite his injured shoulder. He winced a bit, then settled back against the pillows. "Humans survive by adapting," he said quietly. "That's our thing, really. We didn't have natural weapons like claws or fangs. We weren't the fastest or the strongest. We just adapted better than anything else on our planet. And part of that adaptation was cultural. We never had just one way of doing things. One culture, one set of rules that everyone followed." He paused, gathering his thoughts. Warren waited patiently. "Earth had hundreds of different cultures," Jack continued. "Thousands, really. Different languages, different customs, different ways of seeing the world. And humans had to learn how to navigate all of that, how to switch between different modes depending on where we were and who we were dealing with. So I learned to make my own path, create my own style, keep people a bit off balance, a bit uncertain about what I'm going to do next." "Why?" Warren asked. "What's the advantage?" "Because people underestimate me," Jack said simply. "They see the jokes and the casual attitude and the protocol violations, and they think I'm just some idiot who doesn't know any better. They think I'm harmless, unimportant, not a threat. And while they're thinking that, I'm working, gathering information, building relationships, figuring out how systems work and where the weaknesses are." He looked directly at Warren. "You noticed, eventually, but it took you 3 weeks, and you're smarter than most. That's 3 weeks where I was able to move around freely, talk to people without them being guarded, see things that people might have hidden if they'd known I was actually paying attention. It's useful in my line of work." Warren nodded slowly. It made sense, uncomfortable sense, but sense nonetheless. "I was like my guards once," Warren admitted. "Long time ago. Rigid. By the book. Everything had to be done exactly according to protocol, exactly the way we'd been taught. I thought that was what being professional meant." "What changed?" Jack asked. "War," Warren said simply. "Real war, not training exercises. I was a junior officer, leading a squad on a border patrol. We got ambushed by raiders who didn't fight the way our manuals said enemies were supposed to fight. They didn't follow the patterns we'd studied. They were chaotic, unpredictable, willing to break every rule if it gave them an advantage." He paused, old memories surfacing. "Half my squad died in the first 5 minutes because we were too rigid, too stuck on doing things the proper way. The ones who survived, we survived because we learned to adapt, to improvise, to throw out the rule book when the rule book was going to get us killed. After that, I never looked at protocol the same way." Jack nodded. "Flexibility keeps you alive." "It does," Warren agreed. "But it also makes you look unreliable to people who haven't learned that lesson yet. People like Captain Morris. They see someone breaking rules, and they assume it's because that person doesn't know any better or doesn't care. They don't realize that sometimes breaking rules is the smartest thing you can do." "Sounds like we understand each other," Jack said. They sat in comfortable silence for a minute. Then Jack's tablet beeped with an urgent message. He picked it up, read it, and his expression darkened. "Problem?" Warren asked. "Big one," Jack said. He handed the tablet to Warren. "Human mining colony in the disputed sector. The Varnith are accusing them of violating territorial boundaries. They're demanding the colony be shut down and everyone evacuated immediately." Warren read through the message, his jaw tightening. This was exactly the kind of situation that could escalate into a real conflict. The disputed sector had been argued about for years. Both humans and Varna claimed it, neither side willing to back down. A mining colony that was like lighting a match in a room full of explosives. What are Earth's official representatives saying? Warren asked. "They're preparing a formal legal response," Jack said. "Going to argue the case based on the original treaty language, historical precedent, prior claims, all that diplomatic stuff. It'll take months, maybe years. And in the meantime, tensions are going to keep building until somebody does something stupid." "Traditional diplomacy," Warren said. "Yeah, traditional diplomacy." Jack took the tablet back and stared at it for a moment, Then he started typing again, this time with a bit more energy despite his injury. But what if we didn't do it the traditional way? Warren leaned forward. What are you thinking? The problem is that both sides want exclusive control, Jack said, talking while he typed. Humans want the colony because there are valuable resources there. The Varnith want it because they consider it part of their historical territory. Neither side is willing to give it up. So traditional diplomacy tries to determine who's right, who has the better claim, who should get to keep it. And that never works, Warren said, seeing where this was going. Never works, Jack confirmed, because both sides think they're right. Both sides have legitimate arguments. You can't solve it by picking a winner, because whoever loses is going to be angry about it forever. So instead, he turned the tablet around so Warren could see what he'd written. What if we turn the disputed zone into a joint colony? Shared governance. Humans and Varnith working together. Both sides get access to resources. Both sides maintain a presence. Nobody wins, but nobody loses either. Warren stared at the proposal. It was creative, bold, and completely insane by traditional diplomatic standards. You didn't solve territorial disputes by sharing territory. That just created more problems down the line. Different laws, different customs, different ways of doing things all crammed together in one place. But then again, Jack had said that humans came from a planet with thousands of different cultures all living together. Maybe they knew something about making that work that the Varnith didn't. It'll never work with traditional diplomacy, Jack said, watching Warren's face. The official channels will argue about it for months and eventually reject it because it's too radical, too different from how things are usually done. But if we can get the Empress on board, if we can make her see that this actually solves the problem instead of just delaying it. He trailed off, looking at Warren expectantly. This was the moment. Warren could say no, could tell Jack to stick with proper procedures, go through official channels, let the diplomats handle it the traditional way. That would be the safe choice, the by-the-book choice. Warren stood up. I'll vouch for this to the Empress, he said firmly. I'll tell her that your unorthodox approach is exactly what the situation needs, that trying to solve it traditionally is just going to lead to more conflict down the line. Jack smiled, and this time it was his real smile, not the casual, joking one he wore like armor. Thank you, Commander. Call me Blake, Warren said. I think we've earned that much. Blake. Jack repeated, testing it out. All right, and I'm Jack, not Ambassador Morrison. Just Jack. Warren nodded. Just Jack, who jogs through sacred halls, cooks his own food, and somehow manages to save lives while making everyone think he's just causing chaos. That's the goal, Jack said. Keep people guessing. Keep them off balance. And while they're trying to figure out what I'm doing, actually get things done. It's effective, Warren admitted. Frustrating as hell for everyone around you, but effective. They shook hands. The grip firm despite Jack's injury. It was the beginning of something new. Not just a working relationship, but genuine respect between two people who understood that sometimes the best way to solve problems was to throw out the rule book and write a new one. 6 months later, the joint colony in the disputed sector had become something nobody expected. It wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. The settlement had grown from a small mining outpost with a few hundred people into a bustling community of over 5,000. Ships came and went daily, bringing supplies and taking away resources. And more importantly, it had become a symbol of what was possible when different species actually worked together instead of fighting over who owned what. The humans brought their efficiency and practicality. They knew how to build fast, how to set up systems that worked, how to get things done without overthinking every detail. The Varnith brought their artistry and cultural depth. They understood how to make spaces beautiful, how to create environments where people actually wanted to live instead of just exist. Together, they created something neither species could have built alone. The Central Plaza was a perfect example. Human engineers had designed the structural framework, making it strong and functional and able to handle heavy traffic. Varnith artists had covered it with light sculptures and flowing designs that shifted colors throughout the day. The result was a place that was both practical and breathtaking. People from across the galaxy were visiting just to see it. News feeds were calling it the Empire's fastest-growing settlement. Trade posts wanted to establish branches there. Families were applying to relocate. The success was undeniable, and it had all started with Jack Morrison's crazy idea to share territory instead of fighting over it. Back at the Royal Station, things had changed in other ways, too. The Royal Guard wasn't the same rigid, by-the-book organization it had been 6 months ago. Oh! They were still professional, still elite warriors, still took their job seriously. But there was a new energy to them, a new flexibility that hadn't been there before. Junior guards now competed for assignments to Jack's protection detail. It used to be a punishment, something you got stuck with if you'd messed up somewhere else. Now it was considered a privilege. Being assigned to work with the human ambassador meant your days would be interesting, unpredictable, different from the usual routine of standing at attention, and following the same patrol patterns you'd memorized years ago. Guard Tyler, the young guy who'd learned to play poker, now ran morning physical training sessions with Jack. They'd started doing it together after Tyler mentioned he was bored with the standard guard fitness program. Now there were usually a dozen guards who showed up, running to the halls with Jack, doing exercises he brought from Earth, challenging themselves in new ways. Tyler had lost 15 pounds and gained enough muscle that his armor had to be refitted. He'd also won back the 30 credits he'd lost in that first poker game, plus another 40 on top of it. Guard Kelly had started what she called a cross-cultural joke exchange program. It had begun as just her and Jack trading jokes during her shifts, but then other guards had wanted to join in. Now there was an actual database where guards from different species could submit jokes and humor from their home cultures. It was silly and informal, and completely against traditional guard culture. It was also incredibly popular. Even Captain Morris had been caught reading through it, though he denied it if anyone asked. Commander Blake Warren had declined all protection duty assignments, not because he didn't want to work with Jack anymore, but because he'd accepted a promotion. He was now Imperial Security Advisor, a position that had been created specifically so he could work with Jack Morrison on reforming the Empire's outdated security protocols. They spent hours together every day, going through procedures that hadn't been updated in decades, finding ways to make the Empire safer without sacrificing flexibility. They were in the middle of one of those strategy meetings when Warren said something that had been on his mind for a while. "You're making me soft," he said, looking at the latest proposal Jack had written. It involved letting guards customize their patrol routes based on real-time threat assessment instead of following predetermined patterns. It was smart. It was practical. It was also completely unlike how the Guard had operated for centuries. Jack looked up from his own notes and smiled. "I'm making you flexible," he corrected. "There's a difference. Soft means weak. Flexible means adaptable. You can be tough and adaptable at the same time. Actually, you have to be if you want to survive in a changing galaxy." Warren considered that, then nodded. "Flexible," he repeated. "I suppose that's accurate." "Besides," Jack added, "you were never as rigid as you thought you were. If you had been, you wouldn't have let me go on that rescue mission. You wouldn't have vouched for the joint colony proposal. You wouldn't have noticed what I was really doing while everyone else just saw chaos. You had flexibility in you all along. You just needed permission to use it." Before Warren could respond, an announcement came through the station-wide communication system. A new ambassador was arriving, a Delden diplomat named Coordinator Vess, coming to discuss trade agreements and cultural exchange programs. Jack and Warren made their way to the landing bay, joining the formal reception committee. When the Delden ship docked and the ambassador emerged, it was like watching a ceremony from a history documentary. Coordinator Vess wore elaborate robes that probably took an hour to put on. He moved with careful, measured steps, each one precisely placed. His entourage followed in perfect formation, maintaining exact distances from each other and their leader. Everything was formal, traditional, proper. Captain Morris stood near the back of the reception line, and Jack heard him actually groan out loud. "Back to proper protocol," Morris muttered to the guard next to him. "Everything by the book. Everything formal and boring, and exactly like it's supposed to be." Jack caught Warren's eye and grinned. "Should we warn them that proper doesn't work in the real galaxy anymore?" he asked quietly. Warren's expression didn't change. He was good at maintaining that neutral, professional face after decades of practice, but his eyes showed warmth and something that might have been amusement. Let them learn as I did, Ambassador, through experience. Some lessons stick better when you figure them out yourself. Fair point, Jack conceded. Katie Rodriguez appeared beside them, somehow balancing 2 coffee cups and a tablet without spilling anything. She'd gotten even better at her job over the past 6 months, anticipating Jack's needs before he knew he had them. She handed him one of the cups and offered the other to Warren. "Tea, not coffee," she said. "The blend you like with the bitter herbs." Warren accepted it with a nod of thanks. Katie grinned at both of them. "Another day, another galactic incident to prevent?" she asked cheerfully. Jack clinked his coffee cup gently against Warren's tea. "Wouldn't have it any other way," he said. The formal reception for Coordinator Vest began, all speeches and proper greetings in careful diplomatic language. Jack played his part, being respectful enough to avoid causing a scene while still maintaining his characteristic casual energy. He could see Vest's confusion, the way the Deldan diplomat's eyes kept darting to Jack's relaxed posture and informal style. Clearly tried to figure out what to make of this human, who didn't act like any ambassador he'd ever met. High above the landing bay, in her private observation deck, Empress Talyra watched the reception unfold. Her crystalline eyes took in every detail. The formal Deldan diplomat, so proper and traditional. The human ambassador, casual and unpredictable. Her own guards, who 6 months ago would have been rigid and uncomfortable with Jack's presence, now relaxed and even smiling slightly. A slight smile crossed her own features. She'd chosen Jack Morrison specifically for this role, despite warnings from her advisors that a human would be too chaotic, too unpredictable, too different from how things had always been done. But that was exactly why she'd chosen him. The Varnath Empire had been running the same way for centuries, following the same protocols, maintaining the same rigid structures. It had made them stable, predictable, strong. It had also made them stagnant, unable to adapt, vulnerable to threats they couldn't see because they'd never learned to look for anything outside their established patterns. The assassination attempt had proven that their own security, so focused on following proper procedure, had missed a threat that Jack had spotted immediately because he'd been looking at things differently. Humanity's chaos was exactly what a rigid empire needed. Not to destroy the old ways entirely, but to shake them up, to force her people to think differently, to prove that there were other ways of doing things that could work just as well, maybe even better. Some lessons, she knew from long experience, had to be learned the hard way. You could tell people that change was necessary, that flexibility was important, that the old ways weren't always the best ways. But they wouldn't really believe it until they saw it for themselves. Until they watched someone like Jack Morrison break every rule in the book and somehow make things better instead of worse. She touched the control panel, zooming in on Jack and Warren standing together, the casual human and the former rigid commander, now working as partners. The sight pleased her. This was what she'd hoped for when she'd approved Jack's appointment. Not just a diplomat doing diplomatic things, but a catalyst, someone who would change the people around him simply by being himself. The reception continued below. Coordinator Vest was giving a prepared speech about trade and cooperation and mutual respect. Jack was listening politely, but Talyra could see his eyes moving, already assessing, already planning, already working even while standing still. The galaxy was changing. Old empires like hers would have to change with it or be left behind. And sometimes, she thought, the best way to change was to bring in someone from outside who didn't know they were supposed to do things a certain way. Someone who would look at your ancient protocols and ask, but why? Someone who would jog through sacred halls and cook their own food and teach your guards to play poker and somehow make everything work better because of it. Empress Talyra took one last look at the scene below, then turned away from the observation window. She had work to do, policies to review, the joint colony to check on, but she was smiling as she walked away, satisfied that her choice had been the right one. The human ambassador had driven her royal guard wild, all except Commander Warren, who had been smart enough to learn what Jack was really teaching. And now that lesson was spreading through her empire like ripples in water, changing everything it touched. Some lessons had to be learned the hard way, but they were worth it in the end.